Before any ships crossed the great ocean, Brazil was a land of incredible life. Imagine, if you will, a place full of vibrant colors, giant rivers, and a forest so big it felt like the heart of the world. This land was not empty. It was home to millions of people. Many different indigenous tribes, like the Tupi and the Guarani, lived here. Each tribe had its own language, its own traditions, and its own special way of seeing the world. They lived in harmony with nature, understanding its rhythms and respecting its power. They were the original Brazilians, the first guardians of this amazing land. Their connection to the earth was deep and powerful. They saw spirits in the trees, the rivers, and the animals. They learned everything from nature: how to find food, how to make medicine, and how to build their homes. They passed their stories and knowledge down through generations, singing songs and performing rituals that celebrated life. Their world was rich with meaning. It was a world where community was everything, where people shared what they had and took care of each other. This was the soul of Brazil before the world changed forever. Then one day in the year 1500, something new appeared on the horizon. Tall ships with giant white sails arrived on the shores of Bahia. These ships carried men from a faraway land called Portugal, led by Pedro Alvares Cabral. These explorers were looking for a new route to India. Instead, they found a land so beautiful and full of resources that they called it the Land of the True Cross. The indigenous people watched with curiosity, unsure of what this arrival would mean for them and their future. It was a moment that would change Brazil forever, mixing worlds in ways no one could have imagined. The first thing the Portuguese noticed was a special tree with wood the color of a burning ember. They called it pau-brasil, the Brazil wood. This wood was very valuable in Europe for making red dye. This tree gave our country its name. The Portuguese began trading with the indigenous people for this wood, offering them small items like mirrors and knives. At first it seemed like a simple exchange, but this was just the beginning of a long and complicated story. The arrival of the Portuguese marked the start of a new era, one that would bring great wealth to some and great suffering to others. The Portuguese decided to stay. They wanted more than just Brazil wood. They saw the rich soil and realized they could grow sugarcane. Sugar was like gold in Europe, and Brazil was the perfect place to build huge plantations. But growing and harvesting sugarcane was very hard work. At first, they forced the indigenous people to work in the fields, but many died from new diseases brought by the Europeans, or they fled deep into the forest. The Portuguese needed more workers, so they did something terrible. They started bringing enslaved people from Africa. Millions of African men, women, and children were captured and forced onto crowded, filthy ships. They crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a journey of unimaginable pain and suffering, known as the Middle Passage. When they arrived in Brazil, they were sold like property and forced to work from sunrise to sunset on the sugar plantations and later in the gold mines and on coffee farms. They faced incredible hardship, cruelty, and the loss of their freedom. But even in the darkest of times, they held on to their spirit. They brought with them their own cultures, their music, their religions, and their incredible strength. This difficult history created a new Brazil. Three different worlds began to mix: the indigenous, the European, and the African. It was not always a peaceful mix. There was a lot of pain and injustice. The Portuguese were in charge, and society was divided. But from this mix, a unique Brazilian culture started to grow. You could see it in the food people ate, a blend of native ingredients, African spices, and Portuguese recipes. You could hear it in the new sounds and rhythms that filled the air, the beginning of what would one day become samba, and so many other musical styles. This cultural fusion was a form of resistance and survival. Enslaved Africans practiced their religions by mixing them with Catholic saints. They created capoeira, a beautiful mix of dance, martial arts, and music, as a way to practice self-defense in secret. Festivals became a vibrant explosion of all three cultures. Despite the rigid social divisions and the pain of slavery, the people of Brazil were creating something new. A spirit of freedom was growing, a quiet but powerful force that would one day demand a country of its own, a country for all Brazilians. The world started to change, and Brazil changed with it. In Europe, a powerful leader named Napoleon Bonaparte was conquering countries. In 1807, he invaded Portugal. The Portuguese royal family, led by Dom João VI, had to make a quick decision. They decided to flee. So, the entire royal court packed up and sailed across the ocean to Brazil. Suddenly, Rio de Janeiro was no longer just a colonial outpost. It became the center of the entire Portuguese Empire. This was a huge change. Brazil started to feel less like a colony and more like a kingdom. Dom João VI opened Brazil's ports to trade with other nations, built libraries, and started schools. The country began to grow and develop in new ways. But when Napoleon was defeated, the people in Portugal wanted their king to come back. Dom João VI returned to Portugal in 1821, but he left his son, Dom Pedro, behind to rule Brazil as Prince Regent. The politicians in Portugal wanted to make Brazil a colony again, to take away its new power. But Brazilians, who had tasted a new kind of freedom and importance, did not want to go back. The pressure grew. Finally, on September 7, 1822, Dom Pedro made a historic choice. On the banks of the Ipiranga River, he drew his sword and shouted, "Independencia ou morte," independence or death. With that famous cry, Brazil became an independent nation. Unlike many of its neighbors, Brazil's independence was relatively peaceful. Dom Pedro became Emperor Pedro I, and Brazil started its journey as its own country, first as a monarchy and later in 1889 as a republic. A new chapter had begun for the Brazilian people. With independence, Brazil began to forge its own identity. The country was still figuring out who it was. The economy grew, first with coffee and then with industrialization. Cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro became bigger and more modern. Immigrants from Italy, Germany, and Japan arrived, adding even more flavors to the Brazilian cultural mix. A feeling of national pride started to grow. People began to celebrate what made Brazil unique: its music, its art, its diversity. And soon, a new passion would arrive that would unite the country like never before. Football arrived in Brazil in the late 1800s. A young Brazilian man named Charles Miller, who had gone to school in England, brought back the first footballs and a rule book. At first, it was a sport for the rich, for the British expatriates, and the Brazilian elite who played in exclusive clubs. It was very formal and organized, just like in Europe. But honestly, the game was just too exciting to be kept behind closed gates. Soon, people everywhere were watching. Workers in factories, kids in poor neighborhoods, people on the beaches. They all saw the magic of the ball. They didn't have fancy fields or expensive equipment. They played barefoot in the streets, on dirt patches, and on the sand. They made balls out of socks stuffed with paper. And as they played, something incredible happened. They changed the game. They didn't play it the rigid, European way. They added their own style, their own rhythm, that unique Brazilian sway that comes from capoeira and samba. Football in Brazil became less about strict tactics and more about creativity, joy, and art. This was the birth of the beautiful game. This new style of football showed the world the soul of Brazil. It was a game that celebrated individual talent and improvisation. And soon, heroes emerged who embodied this spirit. There was Garrincha, the little bird, whose incredible dribbling made defenders look silly and brought joy to millions. And then there was Pelé, a name known all over the world. He was a genius, a king. He scored over 1,000 goals and led Brazil to win 3 World Cups in 1958, 1962, and 1970. He made the number 10 jersey sacred. He proved that a poor black kid from a small town could become the greatest player on earth. These victories meant everything to Brazil. When the national team, played, the whole country stopped. Businesses closed, streets emptied, and everyone gathered around a radio or a television. The World Cup wins were more than just sports trophies. They were a source of immense national pride. They showed the world that Brazil was a country of champions, a place of talent, creativity, and joy. Later, stars like Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, and Neymar continued this legacy, reminding everyone that the magic of Brazilian football is alive and well. In Brazil, football is not just a game. It is a language that everyone understands. It doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, what color your skin is, or where you come from. When the ball is rolling, everyone is equal. It connects people from the crowded favelas of Rio de Janeiro to the faraway villages in the Amazon rainforest. It is a passion that is passed down from parents to children, a tradition that binds families and communities together. A child's first gift is often a football. It represents hope, a dream that anything is possible. You can see this love for football everywhere. On any given Sunday, parks and beaches are filled with people playing. In every neighborhood, you will find a football pitch, even if it's just a small patch of dirt with 2 rocks for goalposts. The local clubs are like family. People support their teams with incredible passion, singing songs, waving flags, and celebrating victories as if they were their own. The rivalries are intense, but they are part of the fun. It is a way for people to express their local pride and their love for their city. When the national team plays, this passion reaches a whole new level. The entire country wears the famous yellow and green jerseys. The sound of samba drums fills the streets. People paint flags on their faces and on the roads. For those 90 minutes, all of Brazil's problems seem to disappear. There are no political divisions, no social classes, only 200 million people united by a single hope: to see their team win. The celebration after a big victory is a national party, a moment of pure collective joy that you can feel in the air. This is why football means so much in Brazil. It is a reflection of our identity. It represents our creativity, our resilience, and our ability to find joy even in difficult times. It is the story of a country that took a foreign sport and made it its own, infusing it with a unique rhythm and flair. Football is woven into the fabric of our nation. It is our art, our religion, and our greatest passion. It is, and always will be, the beautiful game that unites the heart and soul of every Brazilian.